Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. So in this show, what we're trying to do is I'm trying to share stories of individuals and people who generally are doing something unique, doing something entrepreneurial, doing something that they're passionate about and trying to make it their career. That's not necessarily the thing that allows you to be on the show or qualifies you to be a guest on the show, but that's generally what we're talking about. We're talking about entrepreneurship, passion, etc. A lot of it revolves around bodybuilding and fitness because that's what I'm personally interested in. But what I want you to take away from this is just the fact that you can do whichever passion that you'd like to do, and you can make that into a career. It's a long path, but you can make it happen. And basically what I'm doing is showing you 80 plus examples of people who are doing it and who have done it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I would love if you would subscribe because we've got a lot of new episodes coming out. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
People are constantly raising the bar.
Sacrifices need to be made.
What would you guys say are your biggest weaknesses?
You or your enemy right now?
The success of life.
Just a fucking podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I am very excited to bring an episode with Mike Israetel. So I hope you know who Mike Israetel is. If you don't, then that's a really, really bad thing. But so Mike is the chief sports scientist for Renaissance Periodization. He is a former professor of exercise and sports science, and he also has a PhD in sport physiology. But I don't think it's just the degree that makes him quite a good exercise scientist. So, Mike, how did you get here? How did you start doing what you do now, and how did this whole thing happen?
Sure, I'm still trying to figure that part out, right? So I live in the United States, but I was born in the former Soviet Union. I was born in Moscow, Russia, and my family moved to the United States in 1991 when I was 7 years old. And so that's a cool experience, I guess you could call it cool. Interesting experience that I've had. And then I grew up in Metro Detroit, Michigan, which for folks in not the United States, it's a fine place, just typical suburban America stuff you see on TV. And in high school, just by pure happenstance, I began to wrestle for the wrestling team. And that kind of brought me into the world of sport, and I started lifting weights in order to get better at wrestling. And because I sort of instantly became aware of the fact that stronger people have a much easier time wrestling. So I fell in love with lifting while I was wrestling. I wrestled for 4 years in high school and actually didn't wrestle in college because I began to powerlift when I was in college. And I entered my first year at university as an engineer. I was going to be an engineer. And then I sort of had some ups and downs with various academic work for a variety of reasons we could get into at some point. I had a attention deficit disorder that was really gnarly and didn't let me think super well. And then during that time at university, I actually began to really, really pursue strength sport, particularly through powerlifting. And I founded the powerlifting club at the university. I started coaching a bunch of people for free, right? Just because I just wanted to help people and try out ideas and all this stuff. And then I realized, okay, well, so like if I want to know more stuff and I know the science is surest path to the truth, I had better learn the science. And of course, at the university, we had movement science, kinesiology, an entire school of it, actually, not even just a department. So I got my undergraduate in kinesiology. And then I went on to do a master's degree in exercise science, but it was with a concentration in strength and conditioning. Oh, sorry, I just ate frozen yogurt. I've got like a glob in my throat. Yeah. Okay. So don't edit that out. It's the real deal. It's real life, people. So that was cool experience. I got to work with athletes sort of really for the first time, other than powerlifters. I got to work with American football players, wrestlers. And that was really cool. Seeing really good athletes up close for the first time ever was always a trip. You're like, oh my God, like these people aren't really like human so much. And then I ended up doing a year of personal training in New York City with my very good friend and now colleague, Nick Shaw. And after that, so during the time I was personal training, I realized I wanted to know more, and it was not done learning. And it was the inaugural year of the sport science PhD program that Dr. Mike Stone, and if you don't know who that is, just Google Mike Stone strength and conditioning, and you'll see 250 referee publications, something completely insane. And he was founding a PhD program in sports sciences, the only one at the time in the United States. I was the first one, and started my PhD program and finished after 3 years, got my PhD. And during that time, I got to work with tons and tons of Division I athletes. So Division I of the United States is the highest tier of university athletics. It's basically semi-pro for all intents and purposes. And then during that time, I got to work with weightlifters. I got to manage a lot of weightlifters' water weight cutting and diet stuff. And I sort of got to be an informal and then formal diet consultant for the U.S. Olympic weightlifting training site we had. And then I went on to teach for 4 years at the university setting, 2 years in Central Missouri and 2 years at Temple University in Philadelphia. I'm still in Philadelphia. I had to stop being a professor a year and a half ago because the company that Nick Shaw and I founded when I was in a PhD program called Renaissance Periodization had gotten to grow so big that I could no longer justify going to teach as a professor because I could just do so much more productive work at Renaissance. So I permanently left, and now I don't have a day job. I just sit at home all day and in between training sessions work on a computer, and there's nobody here to keep me company. And I cry often, but I think it helps me deal with the just inevitable just toughness of life. So.
Right. And then when it comes to, I think with a lot of the stuff, it's easy for people to sort of not be able to grasp the journey. Like they look at someone like yourself and they think, wow, they must have just come out of the womb with all this knowledge and then just sort of been there. And then is there anything, do you sort of feel like you sort of stumbled your way into the position you had, or did you sort of have a plan and it was sort of like you knew kind of where you wanted to go and you sort of aimed in that direction? Or did you generally just sort of stumble your way here? Or was it, because I can imagine, I think in anything like this where there's been a lot of success, there's a lot of hard work involved, but did you feel as though you were aiming towards something, or did you feel it sort of just happened if hard work was there?
Yeah, much more of the latter than the former. I think that to the degree that you are intelligent and multiply that in a very literal sense. It's basically multiplication. Multiply that ability times your proclivity for hard work, and you get a whole lot of success. You can sort of imagine intelligence as the quality of a light bulb, how advanced the light bulb is, and how hard you're prepared to work as the magnitude of a power source, and how much success you have as where you point that resultant flashlight. Now, where you point it is kind of up to you. You can point it in one direction and have lots of success there, or you can point it in another direction and have lots of success there. The thing is, I think a lot of people sort of just point their finger into a certain direction, like I want to be the best trainer and I want to be famous or whatever, and they have whatever intelligence they do have, they don't plug in the hard work. So a flashlight with a great light bulb or even a shitty light bulb without a power source is not going anywhere, or with just a really shitty power source is just like a very dim flashlight that barely illuminates anything. So I think that what's the most important thing about illuminating an area with a flashlight? A really good bulb and a really good power source. And then where you point it, man, you can point it wherever you want. Whatever you point gets illuminated, just the same way that if you're reasonably intelligent, which is not something you have a choice over, and if you put in lots and lots of work, it doesn't have to feel hard. You don't have to sweat and bleed or whatever the fuck people say. Just apply yourself diligently. Then whatever it is you apply yourself to, you get some measure of success. The only other factor there is, what do you want to do / what do you tend to be good at? And as long as you find something that is a reasonable intersection of things you want to do and want to be good at, then you just point the hard work, intelligence flashlight at things, and things get better.
Right.
That's kind of like a little formula for success, but it's kind of how the process works, I think.
Do you feel as though, Because a lot of people, especially when you look at the I kind of think it's BS at this point and kind of frustrating, and especially when it comes to the gym, but that's sort of a whole nother thing. But the whole sort of hard work thing, do you think there is a point for just saying work hard, and sort of a point for saying, hey, let's reevaluate and aim the flashlight? I forgot my original question, but I think it revolved. Damn.
You mean like the overemphasis on like grinding or something?
Yes,
shit like
yes.
that?
Because it's for me, it's like there's an overemphasis on that, and then that I think you have unnecessary sacrifices. Like I used to make like 3 podcasts a week, but they were all shit. So it was like, like they were just terrible.
Sure.
And it's like I think only in the last 30 has it become something actually useful.
Yeah, I suppose you could analogize that if you have a really great bulb in a flashlight, but maybe the optics aren't that great, spending some time making the optics better could be a worthwhile thing. So like, you could be pretty smart and you could work pretty hard, but the shit you're doing, you just never really applied your intelligence to figuring out like, wait a minute, is this like a productive use of my time? Are there better alternate uses of my time? One of the sort of easier things about being in a sort of market economy and people trying to be successful in a free society is supply and demand really points you in a pretty decent direction.
Right.
And another way to put that very simply is, is what you're doing accumulating the skills to help people? If yes, good, keep accumulating skills. Or is what you're doing directly helping people? If yes, great, keep doing what you're doing. But if neither one of those questions results in remotely a yes answer, what are you doing? So for example, like people put out podcasts, right? And some people start podcasting way too early. They're neither good at asking good questions, they're not good at getting good people on, nor do they have any wisdom to impart by themselves. So the purpose of having a podcast is just to have a podcast. Like I actually have a podcast right now, I guess of myself and 2 of my friends. We have a podcast. And we just do it literally for fun. It sucks. It's awful. We have guests that are just our friends that nobody wants to hear about. We suck. We're not funny. But we have like 1,000 fans that think it's the greatest thing ever. We have a great time recording it. That if I was to tell you that this is like a serious attempt at making money or spreading wisdom, it was just a fucking joke. But I think a lot of people get into they sort of have this notion of I'm going to be a podcaster or I'm going to be a great trainer, and they sort of just try to do the things without uncovering, okay, what are the underlying qualities that make a good podcast? Am I improving my skill set there, or am I applying it and seeing a return? There's a lot of times that's all it takes, and then slowly you get better and better and better, and then eventually, you're doing super well, and people say, well, how are you doing this well? And you're like, wow, I just kind of kept doing what worked, and I was honest with myself when the things I was doing probably weren't working that great.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like those 3 things you said before, that was literally me when I started. Like, no fucking clue. I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. I had shit guests. It was just terrible, absolutely fucking terrible. And it's like, do you feel like with any kind of work you have to go through that period of just everything you produce being shit?
Well, I'll put it to you a little bit more technically. The relative success of any endeavor will always change, and usually it follows a pattern of starting out relatively not great and being relatively better. Now, you could start out fucking prophet and then end up as God, or you could start out as total shit and end up decent, or you could start as total shit and end up a God, right? So usually there's improvement. The degree to which you improve requires some baseline. Are you talented at it? Are you honest about evaluating yourself? Here's a really cool thing for podcasters. There's an intersection of guests that you want to talk to, and there's an intersection of guests your fan base wants to see. You gotta make sure that shit sort of overlaps. Another thing, I don't know why this is Dr. Mike talks about podcast advice, but I figure it's not totally worthless. I've been on a shit with podcasts, I guess. It's really weird. Like, as soon as I got on your podcast, you were like, here's what I'm going to do and questions I'm going to ask. I'm like, fuck, this is sweet. Some people will get you on a podcast and they're like, so what do you want to talk about? Like, motherfucker, I got 10 other things to do. I don't want to talk about shit. You want me on here, apparently you want to talk to me about something, right? And like, the thing is, like, I'm a reasonably social guy. we can just shoot the shit for an hour. I don't give a fuck. But like, is that really the best use of your time? It's fine use of my time. And I think some people are like, man, as long as I get Dr. Mike or Greg Knuckles or Eric Helms, it's just going to be great. And we get on there and we're like, so what's up? And you're like, I don't know, what's up with you? And we're like, but I don't know, there's a lot of, what do you want to talk about? Like, as far as an interesting person, I'm at the very bottom of your list. You don't want to just have me on and bullshit. You know, probably have some questions to ask me. So that goal directedness is something a lot of people are missing, not just in podcasting, but at a lot of things. People go to school, they'll start university, right? And it'd be like, oh, I'm in uni. And you're like, why? And they're like, to like get an education, be like, what do you want to learn? Like when I went to the PhD program, I wanted to learn to take athletes and make them better. I wanted to make them superlative. I wanted to know at the very depths of sports science. The first day we got there, our orientation, our PhD director, Mike Stone, said, if you're here for rehab, you're in the wrong place. If you're here to learn about adult fitness, you're in the wrong place. If you're here to learn about making good athletes better, you're in the right place. And I was like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing, right? But I knew that was what the program was. There were people there alongside, not in the PhD program so much, but in the master's program, that they just showed up because it was a master's program. And they're like, I'm going to learn something. It's like, okay, like in undergraduate, maybe that works. As you go through your field and as you harness your craft, you got to have some kind of vision of what the fuck it is you're up to, where you want to go. Probably, unless you just want to be mediocre, which is fine too. Fuck, there's more to life than being a career person.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's kind of like, I feel like once you, it kind of goes back to that light bulb. It's like, I feel like at the start, you kind of have no fucking clue what you're going to do. Like with this podcast, at the start, it was called Walsham Weekly, which is like, what the fuck does that mean? It was just like a podcast where I talk every week or some shit. It was just horrendous, right? And then it's like,
and like, who the fuck are you? Like,
exactly.
Know, like,
that's the thing.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the thing. And it's like, that's the hard thing that I think I see a lot of people around me, and it's sort of with the similar numbers as me. They'll think they're an influencer when it's like, okay, you've got less than 1,000 followers on Instagram. Like, what are you influencing? And that's the thing.
Yeah, want to be an influencer and are influencer are two different things.
Yes.
Like, not everyone who wants to be an influencer is currently an influencer.
Yeah, that's the thing. Do you? Because especially in fitness, I think there's a lot of, and when I talk to people like Helms, yourself, Greg, it's like I feel like there's a decent amount of mixed feelings when it comes to influencers. And do you think they're in general a good thing for fitness or a bad thing for fitness, or just like kind of iffy?
Can you give me either a person or an
for
archetype
instance,
that would describe like what an influencer is?
Simeon Panda or Mike O'Hearn putting out content on Instagram. Generally, like or if you know Christian Guzman, people like him, generally they'll give like kind of good advice, but a lot of it's like, hey, buy my program for $3 or whatever. And it's like, personally, I think it's good for like getting info out, but if people stick to it, it's kind of like, hey, why don't you go listen to like Eric Helms talk or something? Like, it's just like you're missing a lot, and a lot of it's still very bro-y. But maybe that's not a bad thing if you're trying to increase general population health.
I don't know if they're quite trying to increase general population health. You know, I think that those folks are probably not a net negative to the industry. They're probably not a net negative to society, insofar as they get some folks motivated to begin the training process and motivated to begin the dieting process, and to give folks maybe some semblance of structure, or at least reassurance that a structure exists and that the structure they have, like even if it's a Simeon Panda workout, is something to try. Yeah. And that's awesome, as long as they're not peddling information that's wildly unsafe, which they're probably not usually. I think that's great. Because these guys are amazing at getting shitloads of people in. Like, you know, you scroll on fucking Instagram, and you scroll by me, by Eric, by Greg, and then you're like, Simeon Panda, holy shit, look at his abs. He's got like 80 abs, right? I want at least one of those abs for myself. So you click and you buy his programs and you start training. And at that point, there's a selection process for individuals that tend to be more cerebral, individuals that tend to, you know, be dissatisfied with getting a certain degree of results and want to invest more of their intellect in giving thought to programming, giving thought to the kind of people they're listening to, and eventually climbing the ladder towards more intellectual sources that will give them better programming, but that are not very apparent to find at a first inspection of all of the influencers. I think that you're never going to like land on Greg Knuckles' page and be like, this is the guy, right? You got to know, right? But how do you know? Well, you try a Simian Panda workout and you're like, this is a great workout. And then like you start to listen to your body, you read like 3 other things and you notice like a discordance. You're like, okay, I know that progressive overload seems to be the thing everyone talks about. It makes total sense. But like this workout just doesn't specify it. It's kind of like go at your own pace. What the fuck does that mean? Like I want someone to really like, I think progressive overload is really important. And I also notice that when I do compound moves, I just get so much more out of it. It's so much more economical. When I do those bullshit isolation, like I guess like I don't look like Simian Panda yet, but I just don't feel shit. And then you like look, more Instagram, more programs. You find someone like Mark Ripito or something, starting strength, and you're like, whoa. Overload is number 1, compound basics all the way, sets of 5. This is great. And for like months or years, you just lap that shit up and you make awesome fucking gains. And then, he's referencing all this kind of intensity, volume, progressions, variation. You're like, that's cool. Like, I wonder, like, man, like, that's really fascinating. And like, I've struggled a bit with my pull-ups, but my bench is going well. I wonder why that is. And then all of a sudden, these terms. You scroll by an Eric Helms article where he says progression models, and you're like, who the fuck is this guy? And you start reading it, and you're like, oh my God, there's so much more nuance to this. What? There's a personalization. It's not just one program for everyone. You start reading Eric Helms shit, and then once you read Eric shit for long enough, you spread out to all the other evidence-based people. You get this consilience effect where all the major findings point to the same place, and all of a sudden you're in sort of the good zone. So that's kind of like a trajectory of a person who really gives a shit and wants to think about fitness. Yeah. It doesn't matter where in the industry they come in, Simian Panda, Ronnie Coleman, whatever, they sort of end up in the evidence-based community. Now, if you don't have any intention of ending up in the evidence-based community, if you don't value sort of logic, science, reason, all that shit, man, you can just do Simian Panda workouts forever, which is fine. I mean, you're not going to get the best results. Sure as hell not going to look like Simian Panda, but, it's not a net negative. It's just not as much of a positive. I hope that made sense.
No, I completely agree. It's like, I think I've taken that path as well. It's sort of been like, hey, here's some bullshit, but at the time you're like, this is better than nothing, And then you
totally.
Go
well, you just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. You have no clue. And do you think how do you go about sort of developing your own thought process? Because I think in the least egotistical way possible, I think mine's developed a lot over the last year from basically having complete black and white thinking X is better, Y is better, with no nuance in between, compared to now I sort of try and evaluate things and be a bit closer to like yourself, Eric, Greg, etc. And then sort of, and that's just with everything. How do you go about developing that? Do you think it comes with time, or do you think it just comes with a certain mindset? Or because I think it comes with a certain level of knowing about the thing, but then how do you go about being critical about everything?
Yeah. So I think there's like 2 components you could potentially take, 2 pathways you could take. One is the real talk pathway and no bullshit pathway, and one is the evidence-based value system pathway.
Right.
So let's talk about the real talk pathway first. When wherever you enter the fitness industry, there's lots of fluff. Lots of people telling you to do weird, funky exercises. This is my variation of the upright row. It's magical. It's what's going to get you results. And people think just probably to a large extent genetically or through whatever influences they've had, a variety of other ways, tend to show up with just a very big draw to the no bullshit approach. And they might start with a pretty bullshitty approach, but when someone offers just a bare essentials alternative, like someone like Branch Warren is like, just fucking train heavy and fucking suffer and don't be a fucking piece of shit doing all these bullshit pussy exercises. And you're like, fuck. He's right. And in your heart he's right. You got to grind to get fucking better. So you just follow Branch Warren, Animal Pack, like Universal Nutrition, all that stuff. And eventually, just on sheer knowing you can't get away from hard work and really having just a good eye for bullshit, you end up in the evidence-based space because, you follow the bullshit long enough and it'll take you out of the evidence-based space. And if you follow no bullshit, people are, you end up with someone like Lyle McDonald, where you're like, this guy is just a huge bullshit detector and everything he preaches is just a super basic shit. And then once you follow Lyle, you might start trolling me and then realize I maybe not the biggest piece of shit in the world, and then Greg and Eric and whatever, right? Approach that could you potentially take, and this one usually maybe requires a little bit more education, but if you have a value for the evidence-based scientific approach, all you do is you evaluate any potential program or diet or author that you read articles of based on their consistency and adherence to the scientific approach. So, for example, one of the authors that I read for fun is a gentleman who is sort of like he's an educational psychologist, neuroscientist. His name is Steven Pinker. And he writes in fields in which I'm absolutely not an expert. The way I started to read his stuff is, I sort of glanced on his work once. I kept reading because the way he approached problems was not with black and white solutions. Everything was drawn from evidence. It came from a bedrock of evidence to very, very calm, impartial, logical conclusions, very tentative. Everything was phrased exactly like a scientific thinker would phrase them. Right. And I was like, man, if this guy's wrong, he's either incredibly deceitful, which is unlikely, or just oops, I guess I got that one. It's just, and because he's super smart and super well read, he's probably not going to steer me wrong, because basically his epistemologies is the way he approaches knowledge is just the right way to do things. So, like, if you read an article by Greg Nuckols, he's like, hey, we just did a study, actually just a great study on injury rates. He's like, listen, here's our study on injury rates. There's zero catchy terms, by the way. It's not like we found the answer to how to not get you hurt. He's like, this is our study on injury rates. Pretty proud of it. It was a pretty long study. I will tell you, this is only one kind of research. It's a cross-sectional study, or this is a longitudinal study. We've done a cross-sectional before. Here are the trade-offs. As soon as I hear trade-offs, I'm like, holy shit. Okay, this guy is not just a bullshit artist. This is somebody who thinks like a logical, rational person. And then he starts talking about, like, here are the multiple studies that found these other things. And this isn't an article about his own study. And he's like, and they found some different stuff. And remember, no one study is king, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm like, oh my God, fucking sold. Like, if I let my scientist friends, like I have a bunch of friends in the sciences, neuroscientists, biologists, who don't even lift weights. I mean, they don't even exercise. And if I gave them a Simian Panda article and a Greg Nuckols article, they'd be like, well, one of these people is a thinker and one is just fucking not. You know what I mean? Like, or might weigh less of one. Yeah. So the way that people who find themselves in fitness, who ask, like, how the fuck do I know that I'm following the right people? I'm not getting fed bullshit. If the person you are following too often trips your bullshit detector, probably good idea to follow. You may read 3 or 4 authors within a given week or month. Whichever guy trips your bullshit detector least, read more of his work and the work he references. Right. Point number 1. Point number 2, the people that follow calm, rational, impartial, admittedly limited scientific approach, talking about trade-offs, costs and benefits, limitations of knowledge, statistics, not just citing statistics, but being like, this is a probabilistic estimate. We may not be correct, but this is currently what we know is best practice. When they talk like that, listen to them more. To the extent that they speak in absolutes, vast generalizations, an ignorance of nuance, emotional language, maybe read a little less. And eventually, using those 2 formulas, man, you're probably going to read a lot of no bullshit science people, and Shazam, they're probably right more often than not.
Yeah, I feel like, especially for me, what's helped me actually think about things more is actually listening to people who think and show that nuance. And
totally,
exactly. I feel like it's without that, it's like you're just hearing the black and whites, and then how can you ever develop that? But then,
yeah, because there's a huge question. It's a very important question. How do you detect expertise or even differential probability of being correct and incorrect in a field that is not your own?
Yes.
Using some combination of the no bullshit approach and I would say more of the scientific and logical approach, detecting who in that field sounds like they're doing that is probably going to lead you more to the truth. Like, there's a variety. I'm a big consumer of information, sort of recreationally. Like, I always like to learn stuff. And, there's always a big question of, am I getting my source material from the wrong fucking people? Yeah. And every now and again, I'll stumble, somebody will reference an article to me, or I'll stumble on some kind of author about something. and they'll use like real emotional language. They'll use like terms that are like, they'll basically paint the other side of the argument as like morally untenable, and you're like, wow, I mean, this is gonna be a really easy read if everyone's evil. You know, it's like labeling everyone as Hitler and you're the only angel. It's like, okay, you're just not thinking at all.
I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson? Do you feel like that?
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of his, but I recently have been skeptical, and I am trying to find holes in his argument, because it seems as though he presents himself very much in this sort of guru space, and I think a lot of what he says is correct and very rational, but I think I personally want to be able to find holes in his argument. Do you have an opinion on him, or do you think he sort of is the person who paints the other side as, because he uses very absolute terms like tyrannical and all that. Do you think he could potentially be the kind of person who's painting the other side as Hitler or whatever, or as, yeah?
Well, he's somebody that certainly gets painted by the other side quite a bit.
Yes, completely agree.
So Jordan Peterson, if we had to rank thinkers on Nuance, he would rank pretty high, not the highest I've seen. And so I think he does a really, really good job of injecting enough nuance into a conversation that he just hasn't bought the farm ideologically and is just completely out to lunch. Yes. And see, he talks about trade-offs all the time. He talks about limitations in his knowledge. Like they were asking him at one point, like, what should the social dynamics between males and females in a workforce environment be? And he's like, honestly, I don't know, because there's a lot of complexity, and the people who would tell you that this is not a complex subject are lying. And I'm like, yeah, okay, this is not a man who just like, I have the right answers, right? Yeah. So to his credit, he's really good about doing that. Every now and again, pretty consistently, he'll make what seem to be very bombastic statements of sort of definitive, this is exactly what's happening. Right. But usually, if questioned or pushed on them, he will open up the Nuance book and be like, that was just a quick summary of what I meant, but what I really meant was this complexity. And very rarely is he pushed into a corner. He's like, nope, it's really that simple, and I'm right and you're wrong. The trouble with Jordan Peterson is that he, like everyone, is a flawed individual, and his thinking is not completely clear 100% of the time. But the vast majority of his would-be critics are intellectually they haven't thought in a really long time. They confuse, to quote Thomas Sowell, thinking with feeling, and they're just castrated in their ability to criticize him whatsoever. Right. So they'll, for example, say, Jordan Peterson is pro-patriarchy, which if you charitably listen to him for 30 minutes, you're like, okay, that's not true. Conservatively, it's not true at all. And if liberally, they may be elements of patriarchy he thinks are beneficial and or just at least ancestrally inherited, and elements which he thinks are sort of diabolical and probably good to discard, but discard in a way that is not like a whole cloth restarting of society, but understanding that some hierarchical elements will always be present, even if it is our goal to reduce them. Yes. So Jordan Peterson usually steps up to the plate as far as nuance. Unfortunately, his critics are just really bad at their jobs. They could be having these beautifully nuanced conversations and challenging him in ways that are really like, I would love to see him challenged more on his biblical interpretations, which I think leave a lot to be desired. But people challenge him, like, the Kathy Newman interview. Did you see that one? Yeah. Where she was like, so you hate women. And he's like, really?
It's like that was like...
That's like 9 out of 10 interviews that he does.
Yeah, I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people in the fitness space who actually don't discuss Jordan Peterson, and they say, like, if you mention his name, I will unfriend you, I will block you. Yeah, tons, yeah, and they're just, people, like one guy recently was in a discussion, and he's like, am I missing something? I don't know who Jordan Peterson is. In this one individual, male or female, I forgot who, I think it was a she was like, no. It's like, wow, so like, the phenomenon of Jordan Peterson is wholly interesting. It's like, I'm about as anti-Marxist as it gets. But if someone was like, hey, should I look into Karl Marx? Am I missing anything if I don't know who that is? I'm not going to be like, no. Like, I'm going to be like, you should absolutely know tons about Marx, tons about all the benefits and the good things he said, and tons about the downfalls of his philosophy. Like everyone, God damn it. So so Jordan Peterson, I would say, gets in my book of like super logical people, I think he gets an 8 to 9 out of 10. Certainly not a 10. Somebody who would rank a bit higher. Somebody who'd rank a bit lower is probably like a Ben Shapiro. He'd rank like a 7 maybe. Steven Pinker, if you don't know who that is, I would highly encourage you to look into that. Ranks 9.5 or something like that. That's someone with a ton of nuance, a ton of the guy knows enough to just fill fucking dictionaries, but he's always very measured, very careful in his statements. And Steven Pinker just doesn't happen to be, to most people, super exciting to listen to, because the shit he has to say is like,
so nuanced.
Either you got to think about it a lot, or it's like, well, I guess he's right, but that doesn't get my gears turning. So, and a lot of the times the people, it's unfortunate, I think most of Jordan Peterson's great communications work are in the videos that are the least popular, where he's the most nuanced. But the videos that get shared most, like SJW's destroyed, some stupid YouTube shit like that incels watch, is like, that's the shit where he's being the most bombastic. And I'm like, everyone's like, I could be as good at yelling at people as Jordan Peterson, maybe better, right? But that's not the cool part. The cool part's the part after, where he's like, now let's unpack what you're saying and cut you. Here's a really good illustration of why I think Jordan Peterson deserves that 8 to 9 out of 10. People label him an alt-right conservative. One of the first things he ever said when he hit the public eye was that there was a very precarious balance of liberalism and conservatism in all societies. Conservatives seek to create a structure and hierarchy to enforce past rules so that everything doesn't go completely anarchic and fall apart. And liberals seek to question authority, question unjust and ineffective power structures, and dismantle them. The thing is, if you dismantle them too quickly, you get Stalinist bloodshed. And if you keep them, very, very rigid, you get like, I don't know, like literal Nazism or fascism or totalitarianism, where the rules never change and everyone's completely oppressed. So there has to be that balance of, yes, we need positive social change, but it's got to come slowly and carefully so we don't fuck up more than we fix. That was literally like a lecture he did. And then people are like, he's a conservative right-wing nut job. I'm like, he literally said liberals are essential to a modern society. Like, God damn, I've never heard Ben Shapiro say that shit. You know what I mean? It's just one of these things where, and you ask his critics, like, well, what do you think about him? Like, well, he's just an idiot and he's wrong about everything. Like, wow, fuck, like, it's that simple. Can I shake your hand? Like, you managed to deduce that? I've been over here racking my brain about the shit he's saying, but apparently it's just all dog shit. Fuck, like, I wish I was as smart as you. It's one of those things where, if you're really interested in if there are things Jordan Peterson says which you find really, really unfortunate, which maybe there are, and there's certainly things he says which I hugely disagree with, the best thing you can do is question in a calm, rational manner exactly why you think he's wrong. And when you have your story relatively straight, you can present a very good argument as to why you think that he's wrong. And then the kind of people that tend to listen to him, a lot of times would be like, oh wow, he's fucking wrong about that, and they'll listen to you. But if you're like, he's and you're not even saying words anymore, man, you're just going to get labeled nuts because you are nuts.
Exactly. And I feel like that's, like with the Kathy Newman, it's like it's so hard for people to think, oh, she's arguing rational points, because she's just not. Like, and it's like it's like an unfair competitor for him, and I would love to see him debate someone really, really smart on the left. Like, I've recently been looking into
Sam Harris is a fine person. He did a great job.
And do you think usually quite good nuanced discussions?
Absolutely. So like Sam Harris's first discussion with Jordan Peterson was quote unquote a disaster, because Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris couldn't agree on the definition of truth and the definition of what is effective, right?
So and
I actually really like that podcast, because Jordan Peterson was using truth by analogy. He was basically saying what is true is what is effective over the long term to confer evolutionary survival. So religion is in that sense true, right? But Sam Harris is using true in its literal sense of, does it actually exist in the world, not if you pretend it exists, does it confer survival value, right? if you're an MMA fighter, thinking you're the greatest enhances your ability for your next fight, but is by no means clear that you're the greatest. You may be an amateur fighter that 99% of the fucking fight community can kick your ass. But we're not going to tell you to not think you're the greatest, because that's two different things. The thing is, they couldn't agree on that concept of truth. And I will admit, what Jordan Peterson was saying was very guru-ish. It was very sort of meld with it's using terms not as they are commonly understood, in a way that probably results for many people in quite a bit of confusion. I've been reading literature on the stuff he's talking about for years. So when he says these things are so true, so to speak, and then he explains briefly about their evolutionary survival value, I know exactly what he's saying, but a lot of people won't. And I wouldn't know that shit 10 years ago. So I would have either bought what he said and just been fucking wrong, or not bought it at all and missed out on some great wisdom. So it took Sam Harris a long fucking time to get that shit straight. And once they got straight, they got into some great conversations. But even that was a great conversation. The thing is, Sam Harris has a really cool approach where he will speak to you if he thinks you're talking in good faith. And if you're not talking in good faith, he won't talk to you. I personally, I'll talk to anyone. I don't give a shit if you have good faith or not. I'll try to make up the good faith or something. But it's really great because he cut Jordan Peterson slack and saying, look, I think you probably think you're right, and I think you're probably not intentionally evil. They talked, and now they tour the world together, and they disagree highly on a variety of issues, but that's okay because they're both looking for the truth and they're willing to try to understand each other, versus being like, no, Jordan Peterson is just like an insane Nazi or whatever. And you're like, sweet, like we're just not thinking anymore. Calling someone a Nazi is the easiest thing in the world. And then after that, I don't know where to go from there. And no one's thinking anymore. And that's a bad deal.
Yeah, and I think it's just at the point where it just becomes so unproductive. It's just unproductive conversation. And it's, I think with a lot of this, there's a lot of, I thought of a really good question before, but I cannot remember it for the life of me. This is why I usually have a notebook. Fuck. But, so one thing that I would like to touch on now, getting into a bit more of the specifics before we finish up. One thing that is really big in my community, and we briefly touched on it before, before the podcast. What is your general opinion, and I know you've talked about this probably like a billion times, but deadlifts for hypertrophy and basically are squats necessary? Because a lot of people with scoliosis, they are very limited when it comes to a lot of movements, because it's like the trade-off of risk compared to getting injured and compared to progress. And I think a lot of them a lot of people say, oh, you got to squat to get big legs, and I hope not many people say that anymore. I think that's frankly BS. But I think you need a squat pattern a lot of the time.
I think that you have to squat to get big legs, and that people that say otherwise are not just lying, they're rotten at their moral core.
When you say squat,
and I think
do you
they're
mean
evil?
barbell?
I'm totally fucking with you.
Fuck.
Unless you want to accept the premise that people who don't squat are evil, which maybe they are. So yes, let me answer your question directly without recourse to shitty humor. I think that if you are to make a claim that you can get anywhere near maximum quad hypertrophy with only isolation exercises like leg extensions, you're probably making a claim that's not true to a large extent. If you make the claim that you can get absolutely optimal growth without ever doing either barbell squats or maybe Smith machine squats or something very similar, you're probably also incorrect. But if you make the claim that you can get 90 to 95% of the growth you ever will using hack squats, leg presses, lunges maybe, or some kind of other sort of compound knee and hip hinging pattern, then you're almost certainly correct. And the squats do not deserve a religious sort of placing right in the temple that is the squat rack. That being said, there's that sort of the thing about optimality is there's two very different statements to say, like, do I need to squat to have big legs? Are you still with me?
Yep.
Do I need to squat to have big legs? No. If I really want my legs to grow and they're really a stubborn body part and I'm avoiding squats for no good reason, is there a chance that squats will be marginally productive addition? Yes. I think squats are, for a reason I haven't been able to pin down very well yet, somehow just way more disruptive to the lower body musculature, particularly the quads, even than leg presses or hack squats.
Right.
And I think they're just a little bit better.
So say if you group leg press, hack squats in one group and then barbell squats in another, would you say they're a similar pattern, but there's just something that we can't quite understand yet that makes them superior in some aspect?
Yeah, it makes it like 5% better.
Yeah.
Right. But then again, so let's put it this way. If it's 5% better, but the risk of injury multiplied by how bad that injury is going to be is a minus 30%. I mean, it's just a very clear answer. Do not squat.
Yeah.
Now, for deadlifts, the answer is even more biased. I think the percent of muscle growth that you can get better than other exercises from deadlifts is lower. It may be like 1 or 2%, right? Where squats are like 5% better than the next alternative. Deadlifts, I think, give you the kind of erector development that probably you can't get from other versions of any exercise. But traps you can probably get as big with other exercises. Lats for sure you can get bigger, rhomboids, etc. So if you want, like, let's say sometimes when really high-level powerlifters get lean, their erectors have striations and look really fucked up. What the hell happened to your back? That's deadlifting. But there's tons of the best backs in the world that have never deadlifted much and look amazing and are missing that really interesting look, but certainly not missing the overall back size and certainly not missing large erectors. So I think for deadlifts, the sort of marginal benefit over the next best alternative, like stiff-legged deadlifts or high-bar mornings or bent-over rows, depending on which muscle you want to hit, is very small. The marginal increase in fatigue, or basically the reduction of the stimulus-to-fatigue ratio, like how much more fatigue they give you versus how much more stimulus they give you, is absolutely not worth it for a huge number of people. And if you have injuries or sort of conditions such as scoliosis that can be contraindicated in deadlifting, then holy shit, it's not worth it, right? So, you could just be like, okay, I'm going for 1 to 2% better than I normally could have, like, but I'm putting myself at like really great risk of like really serious injury, like, like, what? How the fuck does that work? Like, that's, with that same logic, you probably should be trying heroin right about now, because you could have quite a bit more fun with heroin than you do in your normal life, but it could totally fuck you up and just permanently disable you and all this other shit.
So trade-offs. And then if you'd like to, I think I've heard you talk about rack pulls before. Do you want to give a little riff on rack pulls?
Yeah, but I'm not so sure I understand the purpose of rack pulls. It's an exercise that is grotesquely fatiguing. It is likely to be considerably injurious if you use it with an appropriate load. If you use it with an inappropriately light load, I'm not entirely sure what you're training at all. And it takes so much time to put plates on that fucking thing. You could just spend that time doing bent rows or high buggered mornings or something else that hits all the muscles just the same, and other muscles too. Here's an example. With high bar good mornings, what you can do, if you keep your back very, very arched during the movement, keeps your back very safe. It's a hip hinge movement, which also trains your hamstrings really well and your glutes pretty well because the range of motion is much greater. The time under tension, so to speak, or the workload exposed to your erectors, because of the lever arm is way longer, is comparable to double the weight in rack pulls, but the perturbations and the vertical loading to the spine are lower, so the chance of deleterious spinal injury is lower. Right? Like if you lock out 495, 230 kilos, if you lock it out with rack pulls and you sort of schmig a little bit, like that could lead to some bad shit. But with 100 kilos in good mornings, 100 kilos if you're sufficiently strong, like you're probably not going to get super hurt. But because of the extended range of motion, it's probably a very similar, comparable workload for your erectors and your back and your trap, so on and so forth, but at way less injury risk, and probably the stimulus to fatigue ratio is just way better. So when people are like rack pulls, I'm like, what about like stiff-legged deadlifts and good mornings? And they're like, yeah, that shit fucking hurts and is hard to do technically, and I don't get to feel like I have a huge dick by doing 8 plates on a side for rack pulls. Like, okay, that explains it. So I'm not a huge fan of rack pulls. If you learn how to bent row properly, how to do proper stuff like deadlifts and high bar good mornings, which most bodybuilders just don't know how to do any of those things well, after you do those workouts and you feel the huge pump in your muscles, you hardly feel any joint pain, way less residual fatigue and a ton of acute fatigue, versus going back to like doing this half shrug bullshit rack pull. You go back to rack pulls and you're like, my joints hurt and nothing else feels like it's working. I don't even know what I'm doing here. Yeah. And then at that point, you're probably less inclined to do rack pulls. It's like going to do full range of motion dumbbell incline press for the first time and doing that for 4 weeks, and then trying to go back to like partial pump reps. You're like, what the fuck am I even doing here? Like, I don't even feel a stretch or contract. I don't even know why. It's just pure egotism. I honestly think the number one reason people do rack pulls, whatever justification they use, is just straight up ego. I want to lift a lot of weight, period. And I don't know why people do it.
Do you think ego in general is pretty much... It's pretty much the worst. I think it's pretty much the worst thing you can have in the gym. Like whether you're doing, say, if with full range of motion you can press 40s on flat, but say if with shit range of motion you can press 50s. What is the point? Do you think there's ever a point to have limited range of motion? Is there ever a point to do
for bodybuilding?
Yeah, just for hypertrophy.
For hypertrophy, yeah, almost never. If there is a point to partial range of motion, it's evaluated on a very rare case-by-case basis. It's one of those like if you drop into a military base with like a tier 1 security clearance and you raise your hands like this after you jump over the fence and they point guns at you, they're like, why the fuck are you here? Like, it's not that the default is, hey, I'm just walking around. Why you guys point guns at me? The default is you have to have a real good story. Why the fuck you're there or else you get shot. Like, you better say something. Like, the same thing with partial range of motion moves. It's like somebody could come up to you and be like, why are you doing that? You're not just be like, oh, I'm just training. Like, no, you're not just training. You're fucking around. But if you're like, well, you see, I think the tricep, whatever fibers really activate more when from here to here and not much from here to here. Also, I have a shoulder injury. Then, you're starting to sort of assemble some semblance of reason why, okay, fine, that's probably a good reason for you to be doing that. But the sort of the burden of proof has to be on the person who's doing a partial movement, because we know full range of motion is safer. We know it's probably almost certainly more effective and all these other benefits.
And then there is one thing that I'd like to touch on when it comes to, because one of my friends, he's a bodybuilder from the UK, Josh Bridgman. He's a very, very smart bodybuilder. I think he takes everything quite well. Do you think at this point of the podcast, what we're talking about is anabolic steroids, just to make sure everyone's got that clear? In general, I personally think that you can do them kind of safely, but it's sort of like you got to be really careful, but there's always going to be risks. Would you generally agree with that statement?
Yeah, I would actually go a little bit further than that. It's not that there's just going to be risks. There's definitely going to be risks. But there's also going to be a chronic negative exposure which degrades your health permanently, and you will pay for it later in your life. The risks are, am I going to pay for it now? The chronic sort of deleterious cumulative nature of substances that you're using means that you're going to be degrading your health and paying for it later. So there is a way, there's probably 3 tiers, maybe 4 tiers generally of using. One is you do the occasional oral cycle and harden up for the summer, and then the downsides are almost zero. And you don't have to worry about anything. Then there's the sort of intelligent light use where you stick to roughly a gram-ish of total substance per week, and you try to use substances that have less interference with a variety of pathways that cause the least health problems. You very closely monitor your health. And then there's I want to be a pro bodybuilder, but I'm not completely insane, where you use something like 2 to 4 grams, depending on the occasion, of injectable plus oral, and you use a variety of insulin and growth hormones, so on and so forth. Use them in a way that is definitely taking a toll on you overall, will reduce your lifespan significantly overall, potentially reduce your intelligence, who knows. And at that point, you are taking risks and you're taking cumulative wear and tear, but it's calculated, and you're doing a very good job of seeing doctors and getting blood work and making sure that you at least know how much damage there is. And there's a certain level of sort of system access, like perturbation that you're just not willing to take. Like if your cholesterol drops to your good cholesterol drops to 0, you're like, okay, it was time to do something about this. Or, if your total cholesterol is 400 or some shit, you're like, okay, blood pressure, you're taking blood pressure drugs. You know that you're taking a ton of gear because you have to for your sport, but you're doing it as intelligently as is possible and trying to deal with the side effects as much as possible. The last tier is what we can sort of term those rich piana level of use, at which point you're just like, I'm just going to use as much shit as possible to shoot myself to the moon. And if if you don't hit the moon, you'll land among the stars or whatever, as that saying goes. And then you just kind of just use sort of obnoxious amounts of gear way past the point of diminishing returns, to the point where it's not even clear if you drop your gear by half, you might still get basically the same results, just with half the side effects. Right. You don't do blood work. You sort of like, oops, I guess I'm having heart surgery tomorrow because it turns out my heart's been dying for 10 years. I had no idea. Shit like that. So I think a lot of them, not a lot, but there's some people on YouTube and in the forums that are definitely in that last tier. Yep. And these are the kind of people that I would not want 15-year or 16-year-olds to look up to. There's people in the, probably most pro bodybuilders go into that third tier of like, they're using a shitload of stuff, but they're using it in a way that at least trying to tend to the negative side effects and with an understanding of trade-offs. And, again, that's nothing for young kids to aspire to, but it's at least, look, if you're going to have any kind of heroes and they are that, fine. There's people in that camp of lower use that, a lot of times are, people that really don't want to sort of unlock the beast all the way, but are using it in a manner that's logical and very, very health conscious. And they sort of know when to shut it down. They're not like 65 years old and still running the kitchen sink. And there's something to be said for that approach. It definitely has its downsides. And then there's the, I do a cycle of Anavar before my festivals in the summer and then whatever. You're not going to, there's no kind of trouble you're going to get into with that. The problem is there's a lot of people just don't fucking know the difference between tier 1 and tier 4. So, they'll use a cycle of Anavar before a music festival and be like, that was awesome, I'm going to do 5 grams of Tren next time. You're just like, oh my God. And the approach to anabolics of things that you take that are like supplements, like you go to GNC and you're like, oh, I'll try this new whey protein. People have that approach with drugs, and this is not the approach you want to take. You don't want to take drugs. You don't want to do it. And if what you want is the results. And when if you start using drugs, then you're going to quickly realize that it's not a fucking party. Nothing is fun about it. It's a price you have to pay to go a certain distance that you want. So if you're not even sure that you have these crazy competitive aspirations, never fucking use the shit. And if you want to compete and you're not cheating by doing it, like if it's in a federation in which drug use is allowed, you'd better do it under the supervision of a medical professional. You'd better do it in a place like the United Kingdom where it's legal, and do it as intelligently as possible and understand that you are fucking yourself over, but just be okay with the extent to which you're fucking yourself over.
Yes, completely agree. Yeah. I think it's a very... Because I think people like to label it as, like, mainstream media will say, fuck steroids, they're blanket statement bad, but then it's like, there's a lot of nuance within that. That's kind of BS. Sure. Like, there's... But I think, in general, the average gym goer probably shouldn't do it.
Oh, absolutely not. It's just not something they want. The side effects are awful, and never mind, the physiological, there's psychological side effects and all this other crap. I think that steroids and stuff like that, and performance-enhancing substances, they pretty much are bad. But they can be pathways to other things that are pretty cool. So it's like, how much do you want to pay the devil to get what you want? Just know that you're paying the devil. Yes, there's some guys who are like, man, I swear to God, like, it's media hype, and these drugs aren't even bad for you, and they're health benefits, and you're just like, all right. I mean, I wish that was true. That'd be fucking awesome. It's just not.
Yeah, but then everyone would be walking around just fucking shredded
diesel. That'd be sweet, right? But on the other hand, like you said, these things don't just kill people like flies. It's hard to think of anyone that has died from steroid use. Probably one of the most interesting, so to speak, recent potential discoveries is that there may be a mechanism, there may be some data to show that long-term anabolic use, dose-dependent, can reduce intelligence. And then, so cognitive deficits can develop, memory problems, so on and so forth. And it's
I'm
very
assuming
concerning.
that would that generally, because I'm not obviously I'm not a steroid expert, but would it depend on the drug you're using, I assume?
Well, so there's some evidence to say that maybe it does. And there's some evidence to say it's just the total amount of drugs you take over how long you take them. That's the biggest variable, and maybe the kinds of drugs are small.
Is it just the anabolic nature of them?
I mean, I think that the ones that a recent paper seemed to show that there's an androgen receptor mediated effect for actual cellular apoptosis in nerve cells. Like the cells just kill themselves if they're exposed to too much androgen, but maybe it's not even too much. It's like over a certain threshold, and then it's actually not. This is in cell culture. It's not. There's a lot of studies about stuff in cell culture that just doesn't happen in actual living organisms. Blood-brain barrier is a thing. So there's not really any super good studies about like people over the course of a long time. Do they get dumber taking anabolics? Yeah. There's one good study that shows that the more anabolics people took over a 10-year span on average, the dumber they were. But like the dosages went from like 250 to 500 per week milligrams, which is super reasonable, super low, to 7 grams per week average over 10 years. I can tell you at the start that a person that does 7 grams per week is already fucking stupid. You have to be dumb to start doing that. To do that for 10 years, you have to be a special kind of dumb. So there's not any good data to believe that people who it's interesting. So I now know a whole lot of people who use, and I know a whole lot of people who don't use. The people, and I knew them before they started using. The people who never start using are just smarter than the people who start using. The average user is fucking idiot because they're like, oh yeah, drugs, that sounds great, and they just never differentiate like, oh, legal risks, health costs. It just doesn't even enter their mind because they're fucking stupid. So you have a really biased sample to begin with. I would love to see some data that actually tracks people over long term and compares maybe high school test scores, college test scores to cognitive scores later in their life and adjusts for career and all this other stuff. That kind of study hasn't come up. Really super curious, whoa, hell, that's a trade-off, getting dumber for physique. And I think if that comes to pass and that's a real thing, then people could be persuaded to not use drugs much more easily. Be like, you want to get dumber, use steroids, right? Yeah. But if it comes out that only really extreme use makes you dumb, or it comes out that there's these other interaction effects and it turns out this doesn't happen, and then on the other hand, alcohol for sure kills brain cells, right? People drink like fish anyway. Yeah. And a lot of people who, I've seen people sort of share these studies about steroids potentially making you dumber, and I know for a fact these people drink like fish, and I'm like, all right.
You're like,
so what do you think about drinking? And they're like, well, that shit's definitely killing off a ton of brain cells, and it's been sure. I mean, the amount of data on drinking making you dumber over time is it's not even like something that's debated anymore. It's just like super clear. So that's definitely a thing. But I think in all of this, more research, more data is a good thing. And because there's so much about these substances we don't know could hurt you, I would play it safe. And if you're going to use, don't. But if you really insist on using, go as low dose as you can to get what you want. And look, if it's going to take the moon to get you to be reasonable looking, just fucking quit, because it's not worth it. But if you're already super fucking jacked before you ever use, and you for sure want to be a pro, and a small amount really changes your body for the better, then maybe it's worth your time. It's a huge risk. It's a huge decision. It has to be calculated. It has to be nuanced. It has to be taken with a lot of gravity. If it's something you're like, yeah, I'll try it. Good God. It's like saying, like, try, like, running of the bulls in Spain. Like, okay. Like, no, there's bulls. They're going to kill you. Give that some more thought.
Yeah, I think it's...
Although they do look adorable.
The bulls or the steroid
Yeah, they're
users?
adorable. Yeah, definitely the bulls.
There's so much more I want to ask, but I think we're coming up on our time. But there's one more thing.
Got another 10 or 15 minutes.
Yep. So I guess there's 2 more questions I'd like to touch on. So I've heard you talk about it briefly.
Sure.
So when it comes, and I think someone touched on it in their story today, when it comes to bodybuilding, interacting with different drugs and just general being a person, a lot of people like to smoke weed, eat magic mushrooms, drink, I don't know, not sure how you do them, but take ecstasy, all that sort of stuff, especially in Britain, very, very big, even though I'm New Zealand. And then compared to alcohol, generally, do you think those things are fine? And I'd like to also hear your opinion on, do you think things like psychedelics can open your mind. Because, for instance, recently and in the past, I've been,
Dabbling.
yeah, and I've found that it's like, here's life, here's how you normally look at life. It like goes like that, and sort of goes like that. Do you think that is generally true, or do you think it's sort of only retards smoke weed regularly? Or what is your general opinion on that?
So I'll tell you this. There are a lot of people that seem to think psychedelics can offer really, really interesting perspectives and offer almost life-changing perspectives that you wouldn't normally experience in waking life. Am I coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay. So there's a lot of people that think that, and I just don't, I can't discount their opinions outright.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're all necessarily wrong. Right. Can you hear me okay? Or am I? Okay, sorry.
Absolutely perfect.
So, because it says poor connection on my end, so I don't know what that means. Okay, so I can't say they're all wrong. I'll tell you from a personal perspective, the vast majority of my friends, like I've done mushrooms a whole bunch. I smoked weed, like I can probably count the number of times in my hand I smoked weed. To me, it's always an underwhelming experience, but people love weed and seem to think it's great. It probably has very few downside. So if you like to smoke, sweet. If you can still do your day job, great, smoke up. Alcohol is definitely just really fucking bad for you in 50 trillion different ways. So if you like to drink, just drink as little as you can and yahoo. Ecstasy, there's definitely some risks there as far as dehydration and potentially some brain stuff over long-term use, although that might be the drugs they're cutting it with. I'm by no means an expert on this part, so maybe that could be approached with caution, but there's definitely safe ways to occasionally use those kinds of drugs and be fine. As far as psychedelics and an ability to see things from different perspectives, my friends and I, generally our experience has been, and most of my friends are pretty sharp, I think. They're all very professionally successful people who did super well in school and have, tech jobs and stuff. For most of us, when we do mushrooms, we just turn straight up retarded and I don't make sense of anything, and what I think is like the best way for me to examine my life and examine the structure of the universe and nature of interpersonal relations is to use my best cognitive capacities to calmly and logically and meticulously think over the problem. I can't do any of that shit when I'm on mushrooms, man. I'm not even close. What mushrooms can do, and maybe other psychedelics as well, is let you really see social interactions in a deeper, more childlike way. So, for example, when you're walking on the street on mushrooms, you'll tend to notice that if you look at someone and you make eye contact with them, they lower their eyes and they sort of look at themselves. And you're like, why are people so fucking scared of having real fucking experiences, looking at other people? But then you realize, well, I'm like 250-pound person. Like I wouldn't want to look at myself. Who knows if I'm safe? Like I know I'm safe. And when I'm on mushrooms, I feel like everyone else is safe when we're just human after all. But that's not really necessarily true in a large city full of tons of people. So maybe people are being rational, but it can allow you sort of that exposure of a really different way of looking at things that feels very much like you've discovered something. But after you give it some more thought, maybe you have discovered something occasionally, but mostly you probably haven't. It's just I'll tell you another thing. Psychedelics have one predictable effect, which is they artificially give you the experience of awe. Like, wow. But that's literally a chemical effect. So after that wears off, you think about what you were wowing about, and you're like, it seems pretty normal now.
Whenever I smoke weed, it's like I'll be sitting at there's this bench we sit at, and then there's the Harbour Bridge in Auckland. It like lights up at night, and we'll be looking at that, and we're like, wow, that's amazing. But it's like, and then you look at it in the day, and you're like, that's fucking boring. Like, it's just a fucking bridge.
Yeah, totally. So I think if you do psychedelics, I wouldn't necessarily do them to go searching for unbelievably revelatory experiences. But if you get them, sweet, just make sure to filter them through the lens of reason and logic after you had them when you're sober. What I don't like to do is do psychedelics and do super in-depth analyses of like my thoughts and like social dynamics. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I can't make sense of fucking dick. Like when I'm on psychedelics, man, nothing makes any goddamn good sense, but it's really fun. So like I just trip to have a whole lot of fun and laugh a ton. I tell all kinds of jokes. Everything is hilarious when I'm on psychedelics. So it's great. Like visuals are amazing. And my friends and I have taken like an absolutely irresponsible amount of mushrooms before, like amounts that when you tell other people, they're like, are you out of your fucking mind? Like, yes, at the time, that was definitely the case. So I think that's super cool. But I think the tripping for the purpose of like I'm going to discover how reality works. Like, no, you're going to discover a lot about how your own brain works, not a whole lot about the rest of the world, probably. So maybe, but I just sure as hell haven't been able to do that. I'm just, man, when I'm tripping, fuck it, I barely know. I remember one time I was chilling. I was hanging out with friends, and I was on mushrooms. And I remember telling them a story, and then halfway through, I forgot what the story was, and then I also forgot what the purpose of telling it was. And I was like, well, anyway, I guess I'm done with that. And then we just all started laughing. Like, that basically sums up my mushroom experience right there.
Yeah. Like, I feel like a lot of, like, even with my friends that I could talk to for hours, like, if we blaze, it's like, we'll hang out, and it's like, we forget how to fucking talk. And
Yeah,
it's like,
100%.
no one can talk to anyone. And it's like, god damn. Like, it's weird. It's really weird. And I feel like with the whole social dynamics thing, I feel as though it's like, it makes me fear, because I feel like there's certain people that I wouldn't want to get high with, because I feel like I'd be like, ooh, is this a good relationship? Should I just cut these people out of my life? And it might be a lovely relationship, but I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, so here's the thing, man. That's actually a potential beneficial use of psychedelics and other things, is when you have people in your life that are like, ooh, I don't want them around when I'm on mushrooms, maybe you should evaluate that relationship. And it's very true that relationship could actually be totally cool fundamentally, but maybe it's not. You know, another thing is, like people say, like when I do mushrooms, everything has to be perfect. Like it's got to be the right people. I can't be in public, blah, blah, blah. It's totally cool to examine that and be like, yep, that's how I like it. That's how I'm going to have fun. But it may be an opportunity to be like, why am I fearing all of these things?
Yeah. And do you think a lot of the time, if it's a person, it could be like this person either does something manipulative or they do something negative in some way, and then you can sort of sense that. But when you're sober, you sort of let it slide?
Or you're just not very aware of it. Totally.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Emotional dynamics become, especially on mushrooms, but probably on weed as well, very clear. Like when someone has ill will, you can just fucking feel it. Because all the signs are there. Like their body language has always been there and everything. Yeah, there's nothing supernatural to it, but it's just some stuff that you're just not attentive to that line of communication when you're sober. But when you're high, you're like, oh my God, that person is just shitting out negative energy. and you know, maybe it's some shit between you. I definitely wouldn't get high and try to like solve beef. That's just fucking gigantic problem. I also don't spend my high times trying to solve problems. I do that in my sober times. When I'm high, I'm to check the fuck out.
Yes. Completely agree. And then we'll finish off with this, a bit more tame of a subject.
I got like 4 minutes until my phone dies, so hit me up.
Sweet. So what would be your general advice, if you just want to give a quick summary, for someone getting into or sort of aiming for your position, anything they really shouldn't do and anything they really should do?
Don't challenge me too soon, because I'm super fucking powerful, and you step to me right now, I'm like fucking Frieza in Dragon Ball Z. I've got like 6 other forms no one's ever seen. Oh, you mean, okay, not literally try to be me. Okay. Man, you know, pick what you like. Pick whatever aspect of what you like that you really like. Calmly study and try to learn as much about that aspect as you can. Figure out a way with that aspect that you can help other people. Begin helping them, learn how to help them better, keep doing it, learn, help. And eventually you'll be someone who knows a shitload, who is helping a ton of people and has helped a bunch of people. And then you will be garnered with high respect and people will pay for your services.
Boom, sweet. And where can people find you online? Where can people find Renaissance Periodization? All that sort of stuff.
If you, whoever's watching, get high enough on mushrooms at the same time as I do, I'll see you in the ether, bro. That's how it works. It's like a different plane. It would actually be hilarious to like walk around and meet other people high on mushrooms when you're high on mushrooms and be like, oh my God. So, okay, renaissanceperiodization.com. Who the fuck goes to .coms anymore? At RP Strength is Renaissance Periodization. That's a company. Instagram, tons of followers, all that good stuff. At RPDRMIKE, RP Dr. Mike. That is my Instagram. Mike Israetel on Facebook. I post a lot of good informative shit on there. And on YouTube, if you just type my name and type podcast, or you type my name and you type in like principles or hypertrophy guides, there's lots of cool videos. So, yeah.
Sweet. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Student Side Hustle. I would appreciate so much if you would leave a review if you'd like to hear more of what I'm saying. Then I would love if you would follow me on Instagram or check out my other social media, all linked in the show notes. And again, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening and study hard.